It is Friday, June 22nd, 2012. I've been back in my New York home for a little over a week. And I'm alarmed by some of the news coming from Burma that I expected, similar to its neighbor Thailand and so forth. I've got a background of subjective concern. In April, when I went to my Russian home in the Caucasus, I flew into Milan Vodi planes that in the past, two of the airplanes that fly south out of Domodedovo were blown up by women with bombs in their burqas. They were left on the planes. And as I arrived, the news was they had just managed to overcome and kill 5 terrorists in their plan to blow up an Orthodox church in Mineral Vodi for Easter. And in early 2011, they blew up or shot up a minivan carrying tourists to Elbrus. Then they murdered 5 policemen at a coffee shop and in Nelchik, and blew up the ski lift at Elbrus. Elbrus was receiving over 5,000 people a year. I had about 6-7 years ago, I lent my brother-in-law drives minibus in the vicinity of Petrogorsk and Stavropol, and he used to drive to tourists to Elbrus, and that wasn't his own minibus. He drove for someone else. Well, then he had the opportunity, lent him part of the money, lent him $8,000 to buy a used German tourist bus, Mercedes. I think it seated 34. It had a little toilet in it. That they did a lot of repairs to it and got it on the road. But now the tourism has been eliminated by all these Islamic murders of policemen, tourists, and the peaceful imams. These things are subjective to me, and I do believe I have some insight that I would like to share. I'm going to give a little bit of a summary. When I first started going to Russia in 2000, and was married in Moscow in September 2000, it had a month wait, and during that time they blew up the subway, and we had to walk through where all these people were murdered. They had pictures there, but they wouldn't allow you to take pictures of the people's images, but I did take a picture of where the murders took place as we walked through. And then the planes being blown up constant, the school all those children murdered in the school, and the theater blown up in Moscow, and just one tragedy after another. But then I start paying attention to international news, and it's going on in the province of China where there's majority Muslims. It's going on where the Muslims are in Thailand, killing all those teachers. It's going on in the Philippines where the Muslims are. It's going on in Ivory Coast with the burning of churches, and the UN has supported an Islamic election there and put the Christians out of office. And in Nigeria, they're blowing up churches and blowing up the UN people, and they've just had a coup in Mali, and North Mali, the size of France, has been taken over by Islamists, and according to Al Jazeera News, it's just the Al-Qaeda types and the Islamists from the Maghreb, or whatever they call it, are openly walking around in support. Now, and the thing is, there's a lot of good Muslims that are sincere and just want to be good Muslims. But what does it take to be a good Muslim? Well, I want to give the background of the ability to care and the harm that Western society and affluence is doing to deprive children of their rights. I'll get into that. On the part of the evil of murdering, a couple of steps. Number one, I discovered as Islam advanced itself by converting with the sword, and they did. They say it's the people, the book, there's a number of nice things in the Quran, but Surah number 5, they're all abrogated. When the Jewish tribe, Muhammad, built an army and went back to fight his own people in Mecca, and when the Jewish tribe wouldn't help him, they became apes and pigs, and that's what it counts. That still counts. That is not overridden by the abrogation of Surah number 5. Read Surah 9. And so there's a lot of falseness projected, like Jesus is in the Quran, but it's not Christ. He wasn't crucified, and Muhammad is superior. But the Christ that's in there, Muhammad had been exposed to the apocryphal Christian literature and accepted some of it. Others he rejected, but one of the things he accepted was from the infancy Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus made mud birds and blew on them and they flew away. That's in the Quran. But as I say, that came out of the infancy Gospel of Thomas, which, by the way, Jesus killed 2 of his friends in that apocryphal gospel. One because he made the water muddy where he was getting the mud to make the mud birds, and another one because he cursed him and he died because he ran into Christ, or Jesus, not Christ. But these were apocryphal books written by the Gnostics. The Gnostics, people believing that I can give you a revelation. But what the Apocalypse or Revelation, whichever title you want to use, says it, not to add or take away from these books. At any rate, so I looked into it, and then I discovered, like, there's still Roma all over. The communists weren't too hard on the Roma. You go into the airport at Mineral Libodi, and there's some woman with a baby and wanting a handout, and still the Roma. Same thing at the markets in the villages. But come to find out, I thought the Roma were from Egypt. We called them gypsies. They used to come in Pennsylvania. My grandparents, they'd pass through, and my grandmother would give them some food at the back door. And here, the Roma came from the invasion of what is now Pakistan and India and Afghanistan, where they these were not tolerant people in those days. They either converted or were murdered, according to Surah number 9. And the armies that were fighting the Islamic invasions moved with their families and moved off the land and fought for a couple generations until they had no concept of where their home was, and drifted off and came to, then most of them came to Russia and Turkey, which were, and the Caucasus, which were Christian at that time, and even though they were Hindu and Buddhist, they were welcome. The Christians helped them, gave them free food and so forth as they traveled around in their wagons and begged. Well, that was about 400 years after Muhammad, in that period, 1,000 years after Christ. And then, of course, as the land of the seven churches was weakened, and that is a story in itself, the degradation of Europe. But that was the Roman Catholic French lord wanting to have the money to pay the Italian Venetian lords to take them across the Mediterranean in ships, and the Venetian lords talked them into attacking their competitors, the Byzantine Empire, the Orthodox Church in Constantinople, and destroyed the backbone of the Byzantine Empire. That the land of the seven churches was taken over by the invading Turks, Islamics. Anyway, I discovered to my horror that in the invasions into Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, the Islamists murdered over 150 million people. I thought that was terrible. And adding that, at the time, I didn't know it was that high. I thought in total that was the most significant amount of murder. But if you add maybe another 50 million being murdered in the intervening time and before, I thought just how the figure I had in my mind was 150 million. How terrible! Like that's how many the Islamists have murdered since they started with this scheme. Pyramid scheme of rewarding the soldiers with the women and the material goods of the people they were conquering, and building the Islamic Empire. Well, how terrible that seemed to me. And then I learned that socialism, whether the feminine socialism of communism or the masculine socialism of Nazism, that in 100 years they had murdered as many as the Islamists had murdered in over 1,000 years. Which is more evil? The socialism is more evil. The class struggle. Well, so communism and Nazism were more evil than in the number of murders than was Islam. And then I learned that they're killing that many babies within 3 years now. Women's liberation has made it legal to murder unborn and postpartum in many areas. Obama voted in Illinois for postpartum abortion, partial birth abortion. When the abortion failed and the baby sticks its head out, it's okay to kill it. At any rate, to me, killing a life is murder, killing an innocent life. And then the dichotomy of, oh, the poor, pity these poor children, and all the money that Europe and America is sending to these African countries, and for the not-for-profit organizations. It's an army that makes a living off from the donations, and more of it goes to the fundraisers than it does to the people that it's supposed to be helping. But that's another point. So the evil, it's not. The worst evil isn't Islam, and it isn't communism, although behind communism is women's liberation is a big part of that. I discovered that was Engels, one of the fathers of communism, a rebellious Jew from Germany, rebelling against the Jewish indoctrination, modern person. But he said that marriage was an invention of the dominating class men, that they could preserve their power by having heirs to their power, preserving it that way. And so women's liberation was a big part of the communist revolution, that and the Jewish rebellion against the Jewish indoctrination. The indoctrination insights that Muhammad had came from the Jewish, as he traveled as a camel driver. And the Jewish indoctrination kept up a people without a nation for a couple thousand years. In 48, Israel opened up again, and Israel still existed. They were there. Well, Muhammad learned that, and learned about indoctrination. The difference is, if a Jew is apostate, rebels against their indoctrination, they're rejected by the family. If a Muslim rejects Islam, that's by Islam, that's the death sentence. So where do we go from here? We're missing one of the most important points. When I was speaking with my friend Al Kolajaitzak, he's a very brilliant Mensa member and all that. Was raised Catholic, had some bad experiences. He's anti-Christian now, and but I worked with him. He had a very high integrity and wanted a better world. He is involved in this class struggle, able to have contempt for the dominant class that is guilty for all the evils of inequitable distribution of the wealth. But I told him of the evil I had discovered going on with the Quran, how it says to cut off their fingers, cut off their heads, and how it's deceptive because there were nice surahs before, but then Muhammad turned against Christians and Jews and had surah number 5, the abrogation, and then had surah number 9 and so forth. But and that surah 9 is where if they don't convert after the holy months, cut off their fingers, cut off their heads, lie in wait for them, and use every kind of deception. But that's what children have to memorize, infants, from the soon as they can, in the madrasas. And if you're a Muslim in America, you can hear about them sending their children to Pakistan, and these madrasas that are being funded all over the world, largely now by Saudi oil money for the rigorous Salafist point of view. But I told Al about this E1. He says, "Oh, what are you talking about? Look at what the Christians did with the Crusades." I said, "What are you talking about? They were trying to go back to the Holy Land and not let it be taken over." He said there were a bunch of atrocities. And I didn't know anything about it. And I was studying European history, Russian history, Swedish history. My forefathers were Swedish. On my mother's side, they were British, having come from mainland Europe in one of the wars, and were under Lord Pelton. I guess they came from Holland. At any rate, I learned much about the conflicts between Russia and Islam, and Russia and Sweden, and how the barbarian Swedes were invited back in to rule over the Russians after they had departed, because the Russian lords were fighting again among themselves so much, and the Vikings were honorable people and could be trusted. Also that the Byzantine Empire hired these Vikings because they were so brave and such good warriors, and after so many of their army had been destroyed by the Roman Catholics on the fourth crusade, never even got to the Holy Land. They just stole the Orthodox gold and killed priests and raped nuns and destroyed their ability to defend the land of the 7 churches. But then I discovered about the problems of upper class Europe, and how the French Revolution, and how the glorifying feminism, hate for the priests, hate for religion, killing, the revolution, they killed many of the upper class. That was more a revolution against religious domination. But then the 30 Years' War and all the Christian wars in Europe, and I looked into it, and here Gustavus Adolphus, the king of Sweden, was killed in battle. His daughter inherited the throne, and she gave up Swedish territories. Like Tinkham, Pennsylvania was New Sweden. The first civil marriage in America was Swedish. But she just abandoned all the Swedish settlements and withdrew any influence or claims or help or anything, and gave it all to whoever wanted it, the British and the French. at any rate, she ended up abdicating and going so where she could live in a Catholic nunnery on the Mediterranean. Catherine the Great, she was a German princess. And when I looked into it, there were many goofy people like this French lord who was leading a crusade that never got to the Holy Land. He ended up killing other Christians. He was sadomasochistic. He would torture. And I'm like, what's going on here? And they talk about, oh, the great Renaissance. And I try to understand that I see all the selfishness and all the fighting between the Christian upper class, the 30 Years' War, and all this, and the crudeness of the Spanish. That was one thing. They had been under Islamic rule for 700 years before they pushed the Muslims back into Africa. But they left this harsh culture, like in Mexico now. There, all these heads being cut off. That's not new to the Spanish culture. They learned this type of cruelty when they were being dominated by Islam. And they brought that cruel, hard culture to South America. I saw it in Paraguay. I saw it in Mexico. The upper class living behind walls with glass on top of their stone or concrete walls, broken bottles, so nobody could climb over, and hiring them for practically nothing to do all their cleaning and babysitting and whatever, and farming or any of that. But the corruption, where did it come from? How is this so far from anything resembling good human behavior? I grew up in a farm town. All I knew was families that cared about one another. And the home church that I belonged to, in the first part of the century, it spread all over South Africa, America, down into South America, in the farm areas where the families were together, and the love of Christ spoke to people. Well, what's missing here? Where was the love of Christ in Christian Europe amongst all these lords that were fighting? And when I looked into it, the problem became clear. And it's becoming more clear. Autism is, last year, 2011, in America, the figures were 1 boy in 54, except in the Amish farm families. When I was born in 39, it was something like 1 in 17,000. The homes were together. The mother was in the home. In December 2010, the G20, the largest 20 economies, met in Seoul, South Korea, and BBC had a special, and they showed how wonderful this little country is. It's 15th largest economy in the world, and how good their educational system was, and the companies and their manufacturing and their hustle and bustle. And they showed Seoul back, a picture of Seoul back right after the Korean War, all rubble, and they focused on a mountain. And then a woman reporter appeared on the middle of that main street with the mountain in the background, and they drew back with her in the picture, and it was the present day, and the beautiful skyscrapers and a fantastic city that had been built there. And then they said, but there's a problem. South Korea now has the highest suicide rate in the world. The major cause of death between the ages of 10 and 40 are suicide. And then they have a Catholic priest, ethnic Korean, come on and say he run a suicide hotline for people to call in. And he said it wasn't that way before the war. And it isn't divorce, it's no home, no family. The women are out working, the children are in daycare. The same thing is going on in China today, and the higher autism rate amongst the wealthy. They are hiring wet nurses and babysitters. And that's what happened, what they call the Renaissance. If you look at it, the Renaissance in Europe was narcissism. Look at my dress, look at my music, look at my dance. That's then the concept of culture of growing healthy human beings became perverted because the wealthy hired wet nurses, babysitters, tutors, and teachers, and the product were these narcissistic and oftentimes sociopathic and sadomasochistic even. And there's insight into this now. They're just discovering that within the first 6 months, brain scans can show the area of the brain where when nerve growth factor was present and the child needed that secure nursing bond, already it shows the deprivation that's going to cause autism. And they want to blame it on this and that, on mercury, and the doctor that published those false papers lost his license. It's published in the British medical journal Lancet. The article ended up being withdrawn. They found it was a total fraud, and he's been removed from the medical profession. But there was a judge in America that gave a bunch of parents of autistic children a bunch of money out of this fund that the drug companies have to pay into in case their drugs cause damage. The power of women's liberation is so strong, the truth doesn't make any difference. And let me tell you, I was working at carborundum research when Nixon was in office, and there was all this push for equal rights for blacks and women. It wasn't equal rights. It was to give them an advantage. They didn't have to do as well on the entrance exams. They had extra points when going for a post office job. And for carborundum research, to get research money, you had to show affirmative action. Well, I started out, a man was able to support his family. And the mothers were in the home raising healthy children. But then along comes this affirmative action, and they've got to hire women and minorities, whether they're competent or not, and they've got to pay them equal pay. So what happens? What's being paid per person goes down, and a man can't afford to support a family anymore because women have been liberated so that they can buy all their clothes and spend have their own car and be out on the road, and the children can end up being in daycare and deprived of what they need when they need it to develop as healthy animals. let alone human beings. There was very interesting research back in the 80s already, where I think it was rats, but rats or cats had blinders put on at birth. It was to study the development of it. You don't get more brain cells, you get dendrites and synaptic network growing. And the way that happens, nerve growth factor is present, and if there's stimulation, these little fibers become permanent. It's a problem, genetic problem amongst the Jewish, where if nerve growth factor stays there, you're in trouble. But it's only present at certain times. And this experiment with rats, with different groups with their eyes uncovered at different periods of time, and then in adulthood they were sacrificed and the visual cortex examined, and what they found, there was a point where nerve growth factor was not there anymore. All the stimulation in the world, there was no development of the visual cortex. That's the same thing with children, except one very simple thing that we don't understand. A parent. For a female, just like, let's talk about dogs, because anybody that raises dogs or minks, or to be a good mother, a female puppy needs to stay with its mother. You take a female puppy away from its mother too soon, and it doesn't know how to be a mother when it has pups. The same thing with mink. My uncle was a mink rancher. And I've told this story before. A woman across the street from my parents, lived on a country road, had a baby, and she was very stressed. She wanted to be a good mother, but she was not good at it for some reason. And the baby was under stress, and it was vomiting, and diarrhea was not thriving at all. And the doctor asked her if there was anybody she knew who could care for the baby during the day that might be able to help it calm down. And my mother came from a family of 9, had raised 5 of her own kids. And she was home, and she was willing to take the child and care for it. By the end of the summer, the child was thriving. It doesn't mean that it thrived as good as it would have if it had a nursing bond, because my mother wasn't nursing it, she was bottle feeding it. But the point is, that woman was not a bad woman. She was missing some mammalian, animal level things that from her early childhood she was deprived of the stimulation that would have given her those areas of development. They might call the limbic brain the mammalian brain, and it might have something to do with that. It's a primitive brain development, things that need stimulation in the womb, early birth. The earlier, the more important it is. At any rate, the levels of love. And I've known, I was at the Unitarian Church and was director of adult education, and served on a 17 church charity concerned ecumenical ministries, the Upper West Side, and organized some after school programs. They ended up making me chairman of the board of that 17 church charity. But I learned from seminar I developed on the needs of children. I had one of the speakers was Bruno Schuttecker, a psychiatrist held in contempt by many because he had ordered the only lobotomy, I think, at the Buffalo Veterans Hospital. But he talked about the levels of love that he had learned at New York University back in the first part of the 1900s. The four levels that he was aware of were narcissistic. Every baby born is narcissistic, and they need to be supported in that, like they're little lords and ladies, and you run around and get them what they want, and they take perfectly good food and turn it into a diaper change. And if you're healthy enough, you love that little troublemaker and cater to it as if it was you're their servant. All right. And especially a mother with the breast in a healthy situation where she's able to, because that's the most important thing, that in a million nursing barn. So not every child who's healthy enough to thrive is narcissistic. And as they develop, the next level is labeled homoerotic, love for others like self. And that is a common thing. After self, others like self. Boys like to play with boys. Girls like to play with girls. Most of the time, depending on their developmental environment and genetics. But you can see where there's a tendency for homosexuality not developing beyond the homoerotic stage. But for most, with a healthy background, once the hormones start kicking in, there's a heteroerotic. Boys become interested in girls, and girls become interested in boys. To discover that girls dress for girls more than boys was an interesting phenomena to me. That different than what I thought growing up. I thought the narcissism and glamour of females was to get the attention of males. Mainly competition with other females and jealousy, which I don't have a good understanding of. Anyway, these are all selfish levels. Narcissism, homoerotic, heteroerotic. And then the fourth level that he said, the first unselfish, was the couple care about each other and have a heteroerotic relationship, get married and make a home, and they have a baby. For those that are able to develop to unselfish love, that's what it takes. And that he called altruistic love, and the four levels. Well, what I discovered with my 3 children, which were born out of my desire and with love, how I cared for the home that I bought to raise them in, and how I cared about the neighborhood. And I had been in New York City where the high-rise apartments were, and all the trash they threw out of the windows and nobody cared. And the same thing in Russia today. You know, walk along the walkway by these apartments and see the condoms laying on the road or on the sidewalk and ground, and the garbage that's been thrown. They hire a lot of women to pick up the garbage every day, but it is a litter problem. People not respecting the grounds, although where we live, Olga does a good job, and others, and it seems to be catching on, with people taking some care about the environment. Although the park is a trashy mess every day, and just young people sitting there drinking and throwing their trash. But that's a distraction. the ability to grow in levels of love needs that foundation of a healthy mammalian nursing bond. And the areas where, like with the Vikings, that were so respected, they were even invited by hired by as mercenaries for the Byzantine Empire, and invited in to rule over the Rus lords because they were honorable. And that had to do from, that was more a cultural, a learned thing. The foundation of men and women's attitude towards children, then this destruction and narcissism of the Renaissance. It was really a destruction. The upper affluent families degraded terribly into narcissism and homosexuality and sadomasochism. At any rate, there was a video presentation by Professor Steven Pinker from Harvard, and the TET, that's T.E.D. You can find it in YouTube. His lecture probably should have been labeled "The Myth of the Noble Savage." I had read all these things about how bad the Europeans were, and to the Indians, and how noble the Indians were, and I'd looked into this, and much of it was false. Published at community college level textbooks, but and there were accusations that an English lord had the natives infected with smallpox, and that there was an English lord sadomasochistic enough to suggest that is true, but the outbreaks were at different time than this, and the outbreaks occurred amongst the military also. That's in a little bit of doubt, but it could have been this sadomasochistic English lord may have had some of his subordinates spread blankets with smallpox. It's not an impossibility, as the sadomasochism amongst the upper class is real, the ones that were raised by babysitters. The same thing is true today with the children raised in daycare. I'm just amazed. I'm teaching high school, and they made a bunch of subsidized rent apartments to help integrate the inner city blacks into the suburbs. And in my suburban high school, all of a sudden we had a bunch of blacks, and it's the first time I saw two girls fighting, and one was actually trying to kick the other with her heels, kick her in the head. And we were instructed in it, that was the first awareness of AIDS, and that we were instructed not to touch students when they were fighting, but because it might touch them, get blood and they're AIDS or something. But I couldn't stand by and watch her possibly stab this girl in the head with her heels. You can read about all the violence and girls being violent. It was not in my childhood. It was a different world. And I'm telling you, it wasn't just my little farm town. My dad was killed when I was 11. My mother married 2 years later and moved to the city, and my older brother, who was not nice to me, came back to live with us, and my mother didn't need me. I had helped her with the 3 younger kids, but now she didn't need me. She was in the home again. And I went for the summer back to my farm town and worked on a farm, and then at 14 I hitchhiked out to Illinois with a friend, Jimmy Reynolds, to visit another friend, Roger Chaplin, who was in the Air Force out there. And back, we hitchhiked back. We had nothing. Picked up pop bottles and hitchhiked back through Pennsylvania, stopped at my grandparents, and filled up their woodshed for the winter. Come home. The next summer, I bought a ride part of the way to Tucson, Arizona to visit Roger. He was at Davis-Monthan Air Base. And on the way back, well, 4 of us, I had gotten a ride with this man, and he had picked up 2 others. We went to Juarez, Mexico for the evening. I could tell you a story too, but I always met nice people. I did meet homosexuals that would proposition me, and I did meet young men that would try to engage me in some criminal activity, and I just said, no, it's against my religion, and they left me alone. Then I went on the road selling magazines. I turned 16, had failed a couple of years, so I entered high school at 10th grade and quit after 2 weeks. I'd forged my birth certificate and got a job in a factory until Christmas time, and then I left and went on the road at a different city every week selling magazines, and went all the way out to Wisconsin, and then come back. Had quit, gone with another man who was going to teach me a Notre Dame canvas, because there were a lot of selling that used the Catholic brainwashing to give money to Catholic causes. And he used a veteran's approach. He's getting points, but he's a veteran working his way through college. That try to sell the parish priest first, and then you could use the parish priest's name and really do well in the whole parish. Well, one of the things they had was a college, and I was 16 at the time, and this fellow had had his own magazine crew before and was going to start up another, and he wanted me to go with him. He just left his wife in Milwaukee. He took me, we went to Notre Dame. I was to memorize and learn about, I hadn't even gone to high school. And he wanted me to learn the Notre Dame canvas and go with him and making money, selling myself as a student from Notre Dame. We got to a week there, and then we went to Gary, Indiana, which believe it or not, at the hotel we stayed at in Gary, Indiana, a black man was entertaining in I don't know whether it was in that hotel or another one, but they came to the restaurant, him and a couple of his people. He was blind, and they came to the restaurant and they said, no, you're going to have to get your food in your room. We'll deliver it to you. I couldn't believe that. I had heard in Houston, Texas, and I had seen heard about some pretty bad things down there. But it turns out this man that they wouldn't let eat in the table next to us was Blind Ray Charles. That just amazed me in a negative way, how they could do that to another human being. At any rate, that weekend I told him I can't do it, I'm leaving, and I quit and hitchhiked home. But when I was on the road selling magazines with money in my pocket, it was a totally different world than when I went with nothing but the shirt on my back. That helped me understand why Jesus sent his 2x2 ministers and told them, take nothing for your journey. Because if you go with a sincere heart, and I tell you, I was rescued in Moscow airport by one of the immigration administrators. I had been arrested because I didn't have the proper documents, and that's a whole other story. And another time I was taken off the train in the middle of Ukraine because I didn't have a transit visa. Olga didn't know I had to have a transit visa. She didn't need one. When she bought the ticket, she had a Russian passport. And I had been told, if you get arrested in Ukraine, don't, at that time, that was 2002, I think, they're so poor, the police will take anything you got. So when we were about halfway through Ukraine down to the Don River to Rostov to go back cut across Ukraine into southern Russia. And about halfway to Rostov, by the time the inspecting officers got to our cabin, they found I didn't have a transit visa. And they said, well, we got to take you off. Well, I left everything, my computer and everything. I said, no, I don't have anything. But I found good people and all the help I needed. Whenever I've gone with nothing, I've always found good people. I don't know if you could do that again today. People tell me you couldn't. It's a much crueler world. But I still find good people everywhere I go. So where am I going with this? The levels of love. There's a need to be able to care. The baby needs a mother that was cared for. Not that the mother cares for the baby, to be able to give that baby the mammalian animal level bond, nursing bond with the breast. There's no substitute for it. And to destroy the place of women as mother and homemaker. Going back to that, where does that come from? This TED lecture by Steven Pinker. He presented the research on the violence in the hunter-gatherer society. And what a myth that we're living in a violent time. The research with hunter-gatherers, which the human race lived as hunter-gatherers something like 2 million years. The insights coming now is that there was a big drought and turned much of the forest in Africa into a plain and drove humans out of the woods where they were primarily fruit eaters, and they became ambivorous, eating meat and vegetables. But then in forming tribes roaming around, hunter-gatherers. And the research shows that the death rate for males in a hunter-gatherer tribe is as high as 60% death by violence. The violence comes from two sources. One, territorial. The main source of violence is one tribe attacking another to take their young women. Now that is just a genetic need for diversity that gives that some natural biological advantage. It's such that amongst some Eskimo tribes where there are so few people in their vicinity, if a man was coming through their area, he might be invited to sleep with the wife or daughter. Not out of any sexual lust or anything, just a simple need for the genetic refreshment, because the inbreeding causes disability. And that's part of what happened in Europe too, as well as the getting wet nurses and babysitters. But you begin to understand why, like in Russia in recent history, they're killing more babies than live births. if how can a woman, and then the parading motherhood is the saint worship. How can they kill so many of their babies? And it turns out there's a whole history of that. That's another thing. Abraham turning against child sacrifice, and the same when they came out, the Jews came out of Egypt. They actually did exterminate tribes that were doing child sacrifice to try and keep that out of the Jewish culture. But the point is, genetically, for millions of years, the women that survived were the ones that went along to get along with the man who took them by violence and rape. But that means that that child may very well represent to the mother not a product of a loving heterosexual relationship, but a product of a violent rape that brings up hatred and rejection. So here, a woman plagued with these things. She's been violated, and she's learned to go along with her violator. Whether having nothing to do with race, but we had a problem in my high school, and the assistant principal, when they had these blacks coming out to the suburbs, the assistant principal, and it was out of caring for the black girls, have a dance, and the white girls liked the black guys, and the black guys liked the white girls more than black girls. But the white boys didn't like the black girls. Now, it isn't race. The same thing going to Germany, the American could get all the young German women they wanted. They were the young German women. The same where I grew up, they put a Nike site in, and those fly boys could get any of the girls in our town. Matter of fact, one married my childhood sweetheart. But that's another story. Women are naturally attracted to the invader. Why? Because for millions of years, those were the ones that tended to survive. Now, the men working together to hunt and make war, that seems to be more a cultural trait. Without a father to raise the young children, or a male environment to dominate them, they become reckless, and I taught math for the bad boys. Most of them were, it was math for the building trades. Many of them were boys thrown out of other school districts and moved into ours, and taking a special Board of Cooperative Educational Services course on the building trades, but they needed a math instructor for that, and the principal wanted to punish me because I spoke out too much in public meetings. But I had this. And, the boys with no mother. Two things about these boys. I had a parents meeting to start the year and made a contract. I had done a master's degree in education with my project being a computerized course record keeping, grading, and evaluation system. I graded everything. I graded their homework every day. I graded their reading notes. I hired other students from previous years to help me with the stuff that was just the right or wrong answer. And I'd record their grades every day and pass back their papers the next. And every Saturday I'd spend the day making up the weekly report cards and hand them out on Monday. And the first week I handed them out, and the one guy with a letter said, "How can you fail me?" I didn't fail you. I just performed a service. I added up your points. And if they didn't do their homework, I kept them after school. The period was an hour. The other teacher said, "Who are you punishing?" But keeping those bad boys after school and helping them to get engaged and suffering with them, I built a relationship. My first wife died. This house I'm in, I got back after 15 years of being single and divorced. The house was a mess, and I hired boys to come and help me as I remodeled. They were particularly good at tearing things down, but really I got some very good cooperation from these young men. But the ones that wouldn't do their homework, I call home, and the fatherless, and the mother asked, so the mother is not doing his homework, and she said, "What can I do? He won't listen to me." And many of them were already big enough to intimidate their mothers. There's another whole set of boys that are dominated by their mothers, and there's a high probability of not being very manly amongst that group. But that's a whole other thing. Fathers need a relationship. You need to be able to suffer with your children, to be able to have the relationship that they can accept discipline without hating. Well, at this seminar on the needs of children, or the important thing about these boys, when I had started with the youngest children, I had the Commissioner of Health, Don Thomas, for the first the big public health problem with teenage pregnancy, and the neglect that the children, the babies get. But when it came to teenagers, I had Dr. Donaferio from the Western New York Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Clinic. Now that was the main referral place for Buffalo and Erie County schools for children that needed psychiatric help. And as the moderator of the symposium, or it was 8 or 9 weeks after church, people would bring their lunch and have the speaker. And nuns, and I ended up being invited to try and start up another needs of children charity. Turned out those were mainly social workers that wanted to start it up so they'd have a job. But that's another thing. Dr. Donaferio, when he got through, I says, you know, it doesn't seem to me like you're talking about my bad boys. The guys with the leather jackets and out on the street making trouble. He said, "No, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the boys whose mother won't let them out of the house. The ones on the street might not be behaving the way you want, but they're learning the social skills and developing psychologically. The ones stuck without interaction at home, being forced to study, they're deprived of the necessary interactions to develop psychologically, and many end up with permanent psychiatric disability." And lo and behold, there was a kid who had been one of the top students in the school, went to Harvard, and before the year was out, he was washing dishes in the restaurant that I would go for supper in. But at any rate, we're not so ignorant. Children need love, and Western society is committing crime against children. And we can take and understand the need for breeding, and breeding those good properties to make puppies that are good at mothering puppies. We can make a fierce barnyard dog, or we can make a nice poodle by genetic preferences, and I bred goldfish to be the color I wanted them by choosing the parents. You know, and hard. So we could probably help by choosing mothers well and rewarding them, and choosing fathers well and rewarding them. And men and women are different. Men's brains are different. The brain scans show that. And men are developed from working where they have to plan the battle, have to plan the hunt, not just here and now. To care for a child and make a home and have the food, that a type of brain skill is not what a man is good at. Keeping in the here and now. Women are. But when it comes to looking ahead, or the planning for the defense or the conflict, women have managed historically by manipulating the authority figures. The churches in Western society are going dead because, like in this town, if a man hollers at his wife now, he can be arrested. They don't need a preacher or a church group to give them support. They can throw the man out. The same thing in Russia. Women have control of the children, have control of the home, and that's the way it is. Women's liberation has won, but it's not respecting the human rights of children to build a healthy next generation. So we have on one side the indoctrination by in the madrasas of the crime against humanity of those children, depriving them of their free mind, indoctrinating them at such an early age that it becomes part of their neurological network and they can't discriminate between the reality and what they were indoctrinated with. They're robots. It's a crime against humanity and it has to stop. But the same thing with letting these babies cry and not giving them a loving nursing bond. It's a crime against humanity. It's got to stop. But you won't get elected saying that. So let's hope the spirit of truth can help wake up people and we can start protecting children's rights and recognize, yes, like the Bible says, let women keep silence in the churches. If they want to know anything, let them ask their husband at home. Wives, respect your husbands. Husbands, love your wives and protect them and provide for them. But in all the problems with politics and social leadership, there is no good answer written in some college textbook. A quick background, when I asked myself what was the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, I had quit construction and settled down repairing office equipment. I'd gone to school for a summer and they sent me to Syracuse, New York, 150 miles away from home. And I had a room there and I'm laying and thinking, what's the meaning of life? I knew I wanted to find a wife and settle down and have a family. But in my reasoning, what gives life meaning? It had to do with group behavior, because solitary confinement is a meaningless life. Give the whole universe, if there's nobody else in it, it gets kind of dull. So to really understand the meaning of life, you need to understand sociology. I went and signed up with Dr. Bell at night school at Syracuse University, Sociology 101. But to really understand group behavior, you have to understand the individual that they make up the group. To really understand the individual, you need to understand their brain body system. To really understand the physiology of the human body, you need to understand the cells that make it up. And to really understand the cells that make up the body, you need to understand the chemistry that they're made from. And to really understand the chemistry they're made from, you need to understand the atoms and the particles that make up the molecules. You need to understand physics. And to really understand physics, you need to understand mathematics, the language to express it quantitatively, and computers to model it. Now, I ended up with degrees in mathematics and physics and a minor in computer science. Then went on to graduate degree in science education. I was a candidate for a PhD in physics, but dropped that for my master's in education and never went back to study on my own. But then later I asked myself, what would motivate God to create the universe? I thought about it. The same thing for company. Well, so for life to have meaning, somebody needs to be aware. It needs to go on to the next generation. Well, do you need a God sitting on a cloud to be aware? We're aware. We provide meaning to each other. And then, later on, comes Paul. How wonderful. In God we live and move and have our being. God isn't created or destroyed. We're made out of his dust. Like creation is like forming a hat. We're part of God and can serve God in eternity by caring about people and the future and build the future and give meaning to our life because we've contributed to the process. So you need to do something. And to sum this up, this overview, talking to Olga and seeing the wonderful elderly couples that our home church lets come to Russia or China or wherever, and basically they're allowed to come to make a comfort station for the workers, so the ministers. And the ministers started this epic around the turn of the century when women's liberation had a big push in Europe, and the Presbyterians were sending out women missionaries. But the Bible says not to suffer women to teach or have authority over men, but the women wanted their power, and through religion they could get it. Through Christian religion, it isn't in the Bible, but they got it somehow after the French Revolution. Well, so they did start with married couples being ministers. Of course, James and Peter went with their wives. Paul talks about going. He could go with a wife or a sister as the other apostles. He wasn't disposed to be married. But and he said that was his personal choice, not from God. But in seeing these older couples that had raised their children and had grandchildren, that had lovely, God-fearing homes, not God-fearing, God-loving, with the care and admonition of a farm family working together. And it came to the conclusion, forget all the psychology textbooks, by their fruits you shall know them. We need to pick are leaders. Not the man is the spokesman, but it needs to be a couple that has shown, and it doesn't take a good man or a good woman to raise healthy children and grandchildren. It is something that clicks together. They both have what it takes. It isn't something you put in a book. You can see it, and that should be a prerequisite for any position of authority in government or religion, that it be a couple that by their fruits you can see the loving families, the caring, the good for humanity. And as you know, home teaching does much better than school teaching. The children do need group interaction and activity, that's sure, in a community situation. But they do better homeschooling than they do in school. And another thing, which as a teacher is a no-brainer, the mothers who have no background as a teacher do better than mothers who have a background of being a teacher. And that, when you think of it, is a no-brainer. To be a teacher, you have to take 20 to 40 students and control them. Force them to be on task, the task that you want. I was blessed. I taught physics after there were the impact of the Man to the Moon project, and they understood that they were ending up with engineers that couldn't do math and mathematicians that didn't understand how to apply it, and that they needed hands-on experience. So I was given class sizes of 12 and 14 and taught by an offshoot, my own offshoot of Harvard Project Physics. I taught by investigation, by pairs. So if I had 12 students, I basically had 6 pairs. My job was mainly setting up the equipment that they could do the experiments and helping them with the skills they needed to do their analysis. And if I had 16 students, I had 8 pairs. And it was wonderful. My wife divorced me, but to have these children by the end of the year, they were such a joy to be with. They were involved in their own learning from their experience. It was a blessing. But you can understand that a mother who was a teacher who had to control a class size of 30 kids and keep them all on task is used to having to dominate and control rather than respect the curiosity and the path of investigation that curiosity takes the mind. So, by their fruits you shall know them. We need to make it a prerequisite. We need men to be the spokesman, but we need a man and a woman to hold the office. A couple that by their fruits, by the caring, responsible love for self, for mate, for home, for children, for community, for country, for mankind. That they've grown in these levels of caring as a prerequisite to run for office or to be head of the church. And the church is a body of believers, and still believe it shouldn't involve money, just meeting in the homes. And, I go to Russia twice a year and nobody gives me anything. I taught English by having a parallel English-Russian Bible. Well, I've gone on longer with any video than I've ever gone on before. And I believe I've pretty much summarized the wisdom that life has afforded me. I would be glad to hear your comments. I'll put a note for email and the website, thewaythetruthandthelife.net. Thank you for your time and attention.